So who gets to decide what womanhood is? Who gets to tell you what it means to be a woman? Okay? Really and truly, what we see throughout history is that systems of power have told women what it means to be a woman. Okay? And this includes religion, culture, family, and now social media. Okay, social media is now a system of power. When you think about the way algorithms work, etc., social media is also a system of power. And that's why it is true that social media has a significant influence on how women see themselves, but also the information that women now have access to. And I can understand why there is lots of discourse around social media and its impact specifically on young women, their sense of self, how their identity forms, and also self-worth, self-value, body image. And what I want to talk about in this video is that we need to understand the invisible contracts around womanhood. Because sometimes when there are commentators from any school of thought, whether it's political, social, or otherwise, talking about the state of society, talking about a declining birth rate, talking about heteropessimism, okay, about the fact that apparently now women are being pressured into remaining single. Women are being shamed for wanting love, for wanting marriage, specifically with men, because this is a very heteronormative conversation. There doesn't seem to be too much concern about women who love women, men who love men, for example. What we're really getting to the heart of here is heterosexual women being told what womanhood, femininity, is. And traditionally and historically, womanhood has been defined by marriage and motherhood, marriage to a man specifically, right? The status quo, okay, the script to be followed is that a girl would remain in her parental home under the authority of a father, okay? Then she would move into ownership by a husbandly owner. That's the way it goes. Okay, now we don't always think in those terms anymore in this modern day, but ultimately you would move from parental authority into husband authority in the container of marriage. And marriage is a system of power. And quite frankly, the selling of marriage to women in terms of under the umbrella of love and romance is actually relatively new. When you look at the history of marriage, even in holy texts, marriage played a specific function. Okay, and whether or not you're religious or not, even when you look at some of the stories, for example, in the Bible, where love is specifically mentioned, that was outside of the norm. When people, chose to be through arrangement, married to people that they loved. Okay, marriage was always a tool that was used for alliances, that was used for political gain, for acquiring and obtaining resources. And in the course of that, women were exchanged like assets, like property. Because even when you look at the way that when you get married, usually, typically, a woman would take the name of her husband. Okay, and there was so much you can go and research for yourself around the history of marriage and it being used like a tool, and the way women were exchanged, okay, in marriage contracts. People were betrothed to people from birth. If you know anything about world history and how kingdoms were created, kingdoms were formed, kingdoms were maintained, okay, and how people were able to obtain, families were able to obtain social class, maintain social class, and acquire wealth. And so the reality is that systems of power have always defined womanhood for women. Okay, and those definitions are entrenched and they are embedded even on a nervous system level. Hence why we live in a time where women do still struggle if they want to pursue a career, if they want to have money, if they don't want to be a mother, if they don't want to get married. They often grapple on an identity level because what they're really grappling with is the invisible contracts around womanhood and the fact that actually what you're taught and promised, okay, there's a gap between that and the lived reality. And I think it's very interesting that we're living in a time whereby, there's lots of attention on the fact that, for example, young women have been conditioned and programmed, okay, to use their rightful choice and agency, and I'll come back to that in a moment, their rightful choice and agency, for example, to engage in hookup culture, in casual sex. I find it very interesting, some of the arguments that are made to defend the status quo around what womanhood is and what women should be aspiring to, what women should desire on an intrinsic level. You'll find a lot of the conversations will tilt on the fact that, you know, the decline in society morally is down to the fact that women are having more casual sex, that women are exposed to social media influence, which tells them go out there and pursue a career, work for a company, rather than prioritize getting married and having children and forming a family, which of course is the cornerstone of any strong, thriving society. What we're really getting to the heart to is that systems of power are grappling with choice and agency that young women now have. And so they always have to frame things, even the declining birth rate. Now, apparently, women are exaggerating and actually flat out lying about the challenges that they experience in motherhood. Women are flat out lying about, you know, mortality rates when you are pregnant and give birth. Apparently, it's not actually real because the statistics apparently show that this is the safest time as a woman you could possibly have children, and that actually motherhood is wonderful. It's because you don't like hard work. It's because young women are shying away from resistance and conflict. Okay, and the necessary character development that would occur inside a marriage. And so once again, some of the lived reality and the lived experiences that women are now able to share publicly through social media, which yes is a system of power, but now you have millions of women sharing what it's really like to be a mother, what it's really like to be married to somebody. And now that's all lies. That's an exaggeration. Because what systems of power need for women to do, okay, is allow the external to define womanhood, allow the external to validate your womanhood. That's what systems of power really need. And so, of course, it's a very tricky situation when you have women now who are self-authoring, women who are reclaiming their rightful authority over their choice of how they live, how and where and if their body is used by and by whom their body is used by. Okay, that's the real problem. And that's why a lot of these conversations have to be kind of wrapped in morality. It's so interesting to me when I hear these conversations about how women engage in hookup culture, how, the rise in contraception use means that, women don't have to be I can't tell you the number of times I've seen think pieces online about single women and promiscuity. It's not an accident that single women and young women have to constantly be positioned or portrayed as promiscuous, as wanting to engage in hookup culture so that they can avoid responsibility. And that is the reason why, they will not be able to form healthy bonds and attachment when they realize and they wake up and realize the error of their ways and how futile using their choice and agency is, and they decide eventually to get married. Now, I'm talking in high levels deliberately because that's what happens. Okay, it's really important when you're an adult woman in particular, whether that's a young adult woman or an adult woman, to think critically about the things that are being said, regardless of who it's coming from. Okay? Regardless of who it's coming from, whether it's religion, family, culture, politics, you get to decide who you are. This is why it's so important to be rooted in who you are. I talk about what it means for me to be single and child-free because I'm rooted in myself. That doesn't mean this is a path that every other woman should follow. That's not my doctrine or dogma. I just know what opting out of marriage and motherhood has done for my life. But I'm rooted in myself, and I don't need consensus, agreement, approval, validation from systems of power or other people. But I do find it very interesting that ultimately a lot of the conversations around marriage and motherhood and the decline in desire for marriage and motherhood, supposedly, because I do think actually In actual fact, I don't think there really is genuinely a decline for the desire for marriage and motherhood. I think what we're seeing is women of all ages question the status quo and what comes with marriage and motherhood. That's what I think we're really seeing. But the problem or the reality is that it's very difficult for these systems to be dismantled and changed. And so, of course, there's friction, there's conflict, right? If the system doesn't want to adjust and women have more choice and agency, then they don't have to opt into the system anymore. Whereas what systems are used to and what people in society are used to is women giving in. Yeah, women settling, women thinking, okay, I'll accept this type of marriage. I'll accept motherhood in this form. Actually, women are deciding outside of that. Even when you look at the rise in solo motherhood, women choosing to embark on fertility processes as single women, right? Because they, for various reasons, but one of the reasons commonly cited is that they didn't meet a male partner. Usually is that they didn't meet a male partner, okay, and they do not want to lose the opportunity to become a mother. That is outside of the status quo, because your option usually was to opt into what's available to you so that you can be married by any means necessary, okay, even if it isn't in your mind ideal. Or now women have the option, particularly if they have the financial resources, to go down this route of solo motherhood. I think it's really important that when you're hearing this kind of rhetoric, wherever it comes from, like I say, whether it's be a boss babe and go for your career, whether it's get married and become a trad wife, whatever angle it is you need to know who you are. And you need to ask yourself, when you're considering what it is that you want, what's the premise of womanhood being promoted here? And is that paradigm of womanhood, does that align with me? Does that match me? And do not allow the fear stories on, again, doesn't matter what angle it's coming from, to be the driving force. Because I find it really interesting. You know, I see there's a lot of often rhetoric that single women really are lonely. And this rhetoric is not just coming from men who are disgruntled. It's not coming from incels only. It's coming also from women, older women who are married themselves, saying, actually, you're going to be lonely in 15 years. You'll regret the fact that you didn't just settle. You'll regret the fact that you didn't just accept any man. You'll regret the fact that you actually expected, to experience pleasure during sex and it not just be a way that you maintain your marriage. Now, I'm being glib there, but my point is that messaging is coming from women as well. Okay, women who they themselves are defined by marriage and motherhood. And this is why it's important for you to ask yourself, what paradigm of womanhood is being presented here? Do you even agree with that? Because if you don't define yourself as a woman in terms of marriage and motherhood, then you're doing exactly what it is you want to do. If you do define yourself, your womanhood by marriage and motherhood, that's okay too, to be honest, right? It's your choice. It's choice and agency. Those two things matter regardless of the choice you're making. I guess that's my point, right? It's so important to reclaim that authority. You are the authority on you and how you see yourself. And therefore, okay, there's no need for you to allow these external pieces to gaslight you, to make you doubt yourself. Because ultimately, I have no idea why you would have children even though you don't want them, for example. Sometimes we don't think about the fact that this doesn't make any sense. If you do not truly desire to be a mother, you shouldn't be procreating for the sake of it. That also is not good for society or humanity. If you genuinely don't desire to be in a marriage or a relationship, don't waste somebody else's time. What about their mental health? What about their sanity? They could go off and find somebody who does want those things. And so don't allow fear and pressure on from whatever angle. And I know people really struggle with listening, comprehension and literacy here, because what I'm saying is, regardless of where it's coming from, use your critical thinking skills and think about, does this portrayal, does this particular lens of womanhood, does that align with my intrinsic desires? And then make decisions from there.